I just unmuted. So we're going to record this session for everyone who wasn't able to make it today. But this should be a relatively good one. I'm going to get it kicked off here. So today we have Mr. Ben Smoker, who is going to be presenting the CIA Triangle. Ben was previously the Director of IT at Piedmont Healthcare and the VP of IT at Ortho Carolina. So security was always kind of the back of his mind in many previous roles. And I think he's going to be going over a little bit about kind of his approach and how we should look at security as a whole. So with that, Ben, I'll let you take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Fagunda. Just going to start sharing screen here, and then I'll start talking to you all. For those of you who don't know me, you've just learned something about me in the first 10 seconds. You're like, oh my goodness, it's a foreigner. And that's true. I was born and raised in Australia. And I am now a happy, not just resident of the United States, but a happy citizen of the United States. This is now home for me. I've been in the tech sector for 30 years. So what I hope to do today is condense some of what I've learned in the space of 30 years and condense it into about 20 minutes or so of discussion point. As well as being in the world of healthcare IT while here in the United States. Previously in Australia, I was the manager of a top secret data center. And if you think that that is a cool and funky sounding sort of a job title, it was a cool and funky sort of a job. Really, really serious business when from the time that you arrive at your work to the time you're in the data center is a 30-minute process every day, and I won't bore you all with all of the details. Thank you so much for signing up, joining in, listening in today. I think this is going to be relevant and helpful to you. You'll see there at the tagline of this message why a 2,000-year-old security model is still relevant. As technologists, we know that the world of technology changes very, very rapidly. One thing that doesn't change rapidly is foundational principles. Principles that were relevant in the 1960s and 1970s as computer science emerged, those principles are still relevant today. And what I'm going to show you today is at the end of this session, I'm going to show you how some of the principles that we talk about in the world of security and computer technology, these principles have actually been around for a little over 2,000 years. And I don't know about you, I personally find that kind of interesting that it's been around that long. So the CIA Triad, for anyone that's not familiar with it, is a model that says that all data and information needs to have three things from a security perspective. It needs to have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we're going to cover through what those things are. In today, it doesn't matter what your role is. If you work in the tech sector, you have a role in security. I would say that all employees have an active role in security, and sometimes the goal of IT is to train the quote-unquote regular employees of the business what their role is. So it's a complicated world, and that slide that you see there with all of those different things on there, you know, intrusion detection and pen testing and patching and compliance and microsegmentation, these are just some of the things that you will do, but they're not foundational principles of what we're trying to do. So I want to focus on those principles. I want to challenge you here this morning to think about, or this afternoon, to think about value. Value is a thing that is very, very important. And sometimes we focus purely on cost and expense, but value is really important as well. If you take the average family home and ask that question, where is the value, or what is the value? Maybe that's a nice looking sketch that someone drew there of an average family home, and depending on where that's situated here in the Carolinas, maybe that's a $300,000 house, or maybe it's a $400,000 or $500,000 house, depending on where it's situated. And obviously that's a valuable asset for many people. Their family house is the most valuable asset they'll ever own. So we want to spend a little bit of money protecting it. And in the world of security, quite often that's what we think about. We want to spend a little bit of money protecting it. We might put a $500 set of locks on our house. We might spend $50 a month to work with ADT or some other company, similar company, to provide a service with, back to base alarms and things like that. Might spend a couple of $1,000s on cameras. And some of you are probably listening and you're thinking, I didn't spend anywhere near that much. Yeah, okay, that's all right. But some people can spend $500 on a shotgun in case the locks and the security and the cameras doesn't work. And of course, at the end of it all, if you have to ever pull that trigger on the shotgun, you might want to find that a lawyer is going to be priceless for you. So whether the house is valued at $300,000 or whether the house is valued at $500,000, and all of those expenses that you have associated with it, are those things the real value? Or is there some value maybe in the little blue Porsche sitting in the driveway? Maybe there is some value there in that. Maybe over on the bottom left-hand side, someone's left a laptop out on the street. Is there some value there in that laptop? And the answer is, of course, there's some value in that laptop. If you look closely, it's a Dell laptop. There's got to be some value there. Some people might say that within my house, one of the greatest value props that I have is a good quality bed. It's always amazing how some people want to, spend only a few $100s on a mattress, and yet when you think of what percentage of your life is spent getting some rest on that mattress, maybe it's valuable to spend a little extra to get the one that's going to be more comfortable, give you a good night's sleep. Is there value in all of those things? Yeah, there is some value in those things. But where's the real value in the house? The real value in the house is in the home. It's in your spouse or your partner and your children, if you have any children. Those are the things where the real value is. And so when you work for a business, it doesn't matter what industry, what vertical you're in, think about what's valuable to your business. I would say to you today, and I know that I work for a technology company that produces tremendous amounts of hardware and software. I would say that the value to your business is not usually to be found in pieces of hardware: switches, routers, firewalls, servers, storage, endpoints, laptops. That's really not where the value is found in your business nowadays. The value is found somewhere else. So what are your company's most valuable assets? I would hope that you would have said, based on the previous slide, that the employees, the people, are the most valuable assets. But maybe you thought, oh, he's an IT guy and he's going to say data. Well, the people are always going to be the most important and most valuable assets to a company. But behind that, your company's next most valuable assets are probably the data. And that quote there by that famous guy, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." And I kind of like that. Everyone talks about data being the new gold. We have a problem here, though, when we deal with security. And it's you would call it a paradoxical problem. In this triangle that you see here, and by the way, there's a lot of triangles in this brief presentation today. Seems for whatever reason, everything in the world of security is focused around a triangle or a pyramid. Network security in that triangle, you say, why is it small and at the bottom? It's because it's actually the least important. And that's not traditionally what a lot of people have thought. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a lot of people. And that's what's happening in the world today. We've got a lot of focusing on network security, but that's not where most of the value is. Then we've got a reasonable number of people focused on quote-unquote cybersecurity, and that's still not where the real value is. And then the most valuable thing to be focusing on is information security, and yet in most cases, we've got the least resources allocated towards that. That's what I'd like to challenge you today, to start thinking more importantly about information security rather than network security. When Target was breached, we all know about the Target breach. Came in through a HVAC system, the network was penetrated. No one cared that Target's HVAC system wasn't secure. So why the obsession with network security? No one cared so much about the fact that Target's SIM systems and things like that should have detected that the network was breached. No one really cares about the fact that the SIM systems were logging but not alerting. And that's a fact. They were logging it. They had all of the evidence that was there after the fact, but there was no alerts configured on that system. Everyone cares about the fact that if you shopped at Target, your data was stolen. It was your information. So we weren't concerned about the network security aspect. We weren't concerned about the cybersecurity aspect. We, as consumers of Target's products, we were concerned about the information security aspect. And so we need to start thinking differently. Look at this triangle here. Many of you have probably seen one before. If you haven't, it is an absolute classic. I think this is one of the bedrocks of the security industry. Let's start right at the very bottom there at that inventory. My experience is, do you know where your assets are that you're trying to defend? My experience is that most organizations struggle. If I said, what are all of the assets that you are trying to defend, most organizations couldn't tell me the answer to that question. And you know what's particularly scary about that? If you can't get the foundation right, you can't get anything right. If you don't know what your inventory is, then you can't put telemetry, you can't do detection, you can't do triage, and so on like that. So we've got ourselves a real challenge here in the industry. But I would say to you, if you work with your business, doing inventory can be done, should be done, and the outcome that you may come up with may be wildly different than what you thought you were supposed to be doing from inventory. Because if you said, I can't do inventory because I don't know where all of my phones are, I don't know where all of my desktops are, I don't know where all of my laptops are, my switches, my routers, I would say to you, those are not the assets that you're trying to protect. And so maybe the problem isn't as difficult as you thought. Let's focus on protecting what the assets are that are valuable. And the assets that are valuable are not the physical pieces of hardware. The assets that's valuable is the systems and the data within the systems. I'm going to move fairly quickly through this slide, but depending on what industry vertical you're in, you'll see a lot of these things resonate and make sense to you. Let's start at the top with everyone. These things, I believe, are across the board. I believe in any industry today, these are some of the most incredibly important assets that you have right now. For instance, let's start with employee records. How valuable is that right now? How valuable did people think employee records were on the 1st of January compared to today on the 28th of April? And what I mean by that is this. An awful lot of businesses on the 1st of January didn't necessarily know or care things like mailing addresses of their employees or home phone numbers of their employees. But now that nearly their entire workforce is working from home, that sort of record is all of a sudden incredibly relevant and valuable. Your financial details are obviously the financial details of the business as well as the employees are tremendously valuable. Your backups are a valuable asset. Configurations are a valuable asset. A lot of people overlook how critically important it is to have the configurations of systems protected. And so that's a really important asset. Email, files, and also logs. Logs are very, very important. A lot of people will say, well, I'm logging. Well, yeah, but are you protecting that log? How are you protecting that log? And I'm not going to bog you down in all of the other industry verticals there. I have significant experience in the world of healthcare and what it means to protect those assets in the world of healthcare. And I also have quite a deal of experience in the world of manufacturing and protecting manufacturing businesses. There are things that I have seen when I've supported manufacturing customers, the things that you read about and you think, oh, those are just stories. No, I've seen them in the real world. I saw a manufacturing company that had to buy a new piece of equipment, a new cutting machine, and they had the choice of buying the $250,000 cutter from Germany or the $150,000 cutting machine from China. And they bought the $150,000 cutting machine from China. And as a cutting tool, it worked just as well as the German one, probably. Probably required a little more maintenance, but it was comparable. I told them when they were deploying this thing, I said, please don't put this on the network. And they said, oh, you're just so paranoid. And I said, well, if you're going to put that thing on the network, can you at least let me Wireshark it so that we can see what's going on? And they said, absolutely. And we found within the first 24 hours that this new machine, this new cutting machine, was scouring their network, looking for CAD, AutoCAD, SolidWorks, and everything like that, all of those files, and trying to upload them outbound through the firewall, which I had geo-blocking turned on the firewall to prevent that. They went back to the rep who sold them the product and they said, we don't trust your product anymore and we want a full refund. They got their money back. They bought the $250,000 machine from Germany and protected their business. These things are not just theoretical, they're real. They're happening out there in the wild all the time. In some circles, there's a saying, keep the main thing the main thing. And so let's look at the CIA triangle. Now, availability. Ransomware prevents availability. Once that data is encrypted, then your users can't access it unless someone coughs up the bitcoins or you restore from backup. If anything in your data center is a single point of failure, it's going to affect availability. Someone makes a mild configuration error, and now all of a sudden the data is unavailable. And we go on through all of those things. I'm not going to talk about all of these things today. We're going to be sending out this slide deck later on, but I do want you to think about how many different things you'll see there on that list. Just look through yourself. How many different things can affect availability? That bottom one there, weather, animals, cars. I used to work for an organization here in this region, one of the more respected companies here in this region, and they experienced a 14-day data center outage because of a person who was driving their car, had a medical episode, and drove their car through the brick wall of the data center, taking out a couple of racks worth of data. It went straight through a pressurized cold water pipe, and everything that didn't get hit directly by the car was sprayed with water by the water pipes, and it took everything offline for 2 weeks. So if your data is not available, you say, well, my data is confidential. Bad people can't access my data. Yeah, but if good people can't access your data, then you've got a data security problem there as well because it's not available. I would say to you that latency is an availability problem. If people need very rapid access to data and the data isn't very rapid, then that is an availability issue. The inability to scale systems and scale systems rapidly. We ourselves at Dell Technologies went through the first 2 weeks of coronavirus were a little bit painful because our VPN concentrators and things like that were not built to scale a company that has about 140,000 employees, and we went from 3% work from home to greater than 90% work from home in the space of 2 weeks. So we had some availability challenges there. Integrity. Your data needs to have integrity. Once again, top of the list, ransomware is an integrity issue. Can be from outside your organization. It can be from inside your organization. Data corruption. I'm sure many of you have experienced a data corruption issue at some stage in the past. Many of you have recovered from a data corruption issue, and at the end of it, you still didn't know whether it was a software problem or a hardware problem, and those things can be a little bit nerve-wracking. Confidentiality. This is a big one. We don't want the wrong people getting access to our systems, whether they're inside our organization or outside of our organization. Something I see all the time, and I put this database backups on here. I want to talk to this for just really briefly. People will say, well, my SQL database is restricted, it is locked down, it is controlled, the database itself is encrypted, we're using AES 256-bit encryption keys, and they're all very confident about their database backups, and then every few hours they'll do a T-SQL job and they'll dump it down to a disk somewhere, and no one's ever even checked to see whether all users have full control of that backup file. That sort of thing happens all the time. You say, oh, but no one could ever get that out of my organization. Look at that bottom point there, exfiltration. I'm running a little short on time, but you say, what do you mean by exfiltration? You know, how can someone get a 2 terabyte SQL database backup file out of my organization? And the answer is very, very easily. With freely available file splitting tools, you can split that 2 terabyte tool into 5 meg chunks that a IDS and IPS system or IDS system is not going to see. They would think an IDS system probably thinks that a 5 meg file, particularly if it's got a .mov extension, going to an iCloud account is entirely normal sort of thing. So you just split that backup file into a bunch of 5 meg movie files, upload them to an iCloud account, and you exfiltrate it, and you beat all of the layers of defense. So confidentiality is critically important and is quite a challenge. Now, the slide that you see there next, that picture there, EMC, where information lives. It's been a few years since EMC used that tagline and that slogan as one of the company's slogans, but you know what? That hasn't changed. EMC was where information lives back in the old days. EMC is still where information lives now that it's part of the Dell Technologies family. Data is what we've always been about. It's our forte, it's our strength, and it's going to continue to be that way well into the future. Now, what did I mean by the CIA Triad being a 2,000-year-old model? Well, Julius Caesar, during the Gallic Wars, was actually using an encryption algorithm to encrypt the messages that he was sending back behind the lines to his generals. And he was doing that because his enemies were intercepting all of his messages. So he was, history records him as the first person to use a form of encryption as a method of protecting confidentiality. Also, in ancient times, the Hebrew scribes were very fastidious about making copies of the scriptures, and they would go to great lengths to ensure that not only was every word, every time they made a copy, this is before photocopiers, you know, old times, when you had to copy by hand, but they wanted to make sure that not only every word was accurate, but that every letter of every word was accurate, even down to the accents, what's called the jots and the tittles, on those words were all done in order to ensure the integrity of the data. And of course, they made so many copies of their scriptures in order to ensure the availability of them. So these concepts are very, very ancient concepts and principles. Now, moving on to this next slide, and we're almost finished here for now. You'll see at the top there a whole bunch of company names, what we might call Circle Dell, traditional Dell, desktops, laptops, servers, networking equipment, and so on like that. Then Dell EMC, Pivotal, the Pivotal software development company, VMware that you're all familiar with. Sometimes people overlook the fact that the Dell Technologies families owns greater than 80% of the VMware family. VirtuStream, one of the world's leading hosted data center organizations. If you have mission critical applications and you're concerned about the fact that, you know, Azure, AWS, Google don't necessarily offer the SLAs that you need for your hosted application, then VirtuStream is a company that we own and can help you with those things. SecureWorks, tremendously respected IT security company. And also, just in the last couple of months, bought into the family, the Carbon Black security product family as well. That is not an accident. Michael Dell is somewhat of a genius as a businessman. It's a strategy. And all of those companies that you see there, it's not just we're buying companies that are profitable. We have a portfolio, we have a strategy, and it's all about data and managing data. And I believe that we're in a position to help you more effectively than almost anyone else can do. So what would some next steps be? Well, first of all, I know you're all on mute, and some of you probably have some questions right about now. But if you have any questions on what we've covered today, if there's anything that you've learned about today or heard about and you think I'd like to know more about that, particularly when it comes to the world of security, focusing on the fact that data security is really more important than network security and things like that. If something I've said today, something we've covered today makes me think, oh my goodness, this is the stuff that, and now you're just bringing it to the front of my mind again, and I don't need that. Yeah, you probably do if you're at risk. Maybe you've struggled to get your business to take these risks seriously. Maybe you can get a hold of this deck and, you know, show it to someone and say, hey, here's what's going on in the real world. Here's what I've been trying to explain to you. Maybe we could bring in the Dell Technologies team and have that conversation. People will always say information security is not my job. And I will say to you, it will be your job after the fact. If your company goes through a breach or a data loss or a data unavailability issue, someone's going to come looking for you. And they're going to say, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? So You know, it's best that we make it our job now rather than after the fact. It's a lot less comfortable. Does your technology need to change in light of COVID-19? Might I suggest to you now, if you're coping okay now, we need to consider that we need to be ready for the next thing. What's next? None of us said 6 months ago that COVID was the next big thing. We weren't ready for it. So do you need to make some changes there? If your business suffered significant data issues, will it suffer greatly? I think the answer is always yes, it will. And in many cases, it's an existential threat. So if you can answer yes to any of those questions, I would ask you to reach out to your Dell Technologies team. I believe that we are great at incident response, but we would rather help you with incident prevention. And so without any further ado, that's the presentation that I had for you today. I hope that it challenged you to think a little differently about the world of security. I'm not saying that network security isn't relevant. It is. I'm not saying that cybersecurity isn't relevant. It is. But information security is king. And that's where we need to be focusing a large percentage of our attention. I believe that we as Dell Technologies, your Dell rep, your account executive, your systems engineer are very well positioned to help you out with those conversations. And if you haven't thought of us previously as a security company, we've always been a data company. And what does data need? CIA Triad. It needs to be confidential. It needs to have integrity. It needs to have availability. And we've baked those things into our entire set of storage-related products. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate it. And I really like the idea of kind of picturing this as a triangle, because you really can't have information security without all 3 points: availability, confidentiality, and integrity. So I think that's a good way to look at it. So I really appreciate that. We will be sending out the deck and the recording later on today or tomorrow. Just wanted to give you guys a quick heads up. Next, I believe May 5th or the 12th, depending on availability, we're going to be doing another virtual tech talk. This time, though, we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about Dell EMC's next generation of storage. It's not a traditional storage array in what you traditionally think. And it's going to really start shaking things up, in my opinion. So that should be a really good one. That's going to be announced and go GA on the 5th. And we'll hopefully hold one of these tech talks as well to give people some more information around that. So look forward to that invite as well. As always, thank you all for the time, and hope you all have a great day and be safe out there. Thank you very much.